Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi everyone, Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you again with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm so excited to have with me Dr. Essence Rivers. She is my guest and she's going to be talking with us today about a whole bunch of really interesting topics. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and the director of psychological services at Customized Behavioral Healthcare. Dr. Essence specializes in providing systemic, trauma-informed, and identity-centered therapy. As a queer, chronically ill, neurodivergent woman of color, she is committed to challenging shame, stigma, and inequality for people who've been marginalized. Dr. Rivers empowers LGBTQ+ and BIPOC individuals, especially those with ADHD, offering virtual services through PsyPact across the U.S. She is a systems disruptor, my favorite kind, passionate about promoting mental health and well-being through therapy, coaching, consultation, training, and public speaking. By sharing knowledge, encouraging connection, and providing new skills, Dr. Rivers facilitates healing and resilience, making clients feel seen, safe, and understood. Gosh, we need so much of this in the world right now. Welcome, Essence.
Hello.
So happy to have you here with us today.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. This is exciting to hop onto the work that you've already started.
Thank you. What part of the country are you coming from right now?
So I grew up in Ohio, and our practice is in Ohio. That's where my family is and everything. But I'm actually in Florida, kind of like the Gulf Coasty area, like Tampa area.
Nice. Warm and humid.
Yes, and we just had that storm.
Yeah, how's everything? Is that everything okay there?
Where I am, yes. Where other people are, and there are like the library's parking lot is literally underwater. So there's a lot of cleaning up that will happen.
Yes. I don't know how folks in that part of the country deal with it every season with the hurricanes. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a lot. On top of everything else. Okay, so let's start with your story. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be doing this work.
Yeah. My dad is a psychologist, and he founded the practice that I am at now. And when I was younger, we had the same first day of school. So my dad started his doctorate program on the same day that I started kindergarten. And so as I grew up, I was like watching kind of what it looked like to be a psychologist. My mom's a teacher. So for me, I was headed in one of those directions. And I think about middle school, I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to be a therapist. And so I went through, excuse me, I went through school and everything to do that. And when I came out, I thought that I was going to work with like teenagers, and that was going to be like what I did. And I guess the world just had other plans for me. So I wanted, as a kid of a interracial family, it was not very often that I saw myself reflected in anything, really, like in books or on TV. It was just like very not represent, like my identity was not represented. And as I continued to grow and like acquire other identities with my chronic illness and being part of the queer community and all of those things, it was even less of the time that I was getting to see someone like me out there. And so when I was independently licensed and I was able to like advertise me as a therapist, I started to be really open, because I just wanted it, as long as there was like one other person that wanted to be a therapist out there that could find me and see like, oh, she can do it, I can do it, then like that would have been enough for me. What happened is that ended up being the thing that so many clients were seeking me out for. Not at all what I was advertising, just about my identity, because they saw somebody that could get it. And so now the majority of my caseload is queer people of color that are trying to figure out and navigate neurodivergence. And it is so fun. Like I know as a psychologist, I can't be friends with my clients, but if I could, I have like some of the coolest people that I've met. And it's a really special relationship that we get to have because as much as I try to support them and validate them, they also validate me. And we talk about things that I'm going through sometimes. Like my clients are navigating the same stuff. And it's just been really special. So I didn't really look to get here, but I think this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Yes, and I agree. You never life never really shows up the way you think it's going to. I never imagined I would be chronically ill for almost 20 years, but it was going through that experience and that I was able to discover some of these more holistic healing methods that I wouldn't have found had I stayed in sort of mainstream psychology. So, um, in thinking about the work that you do, what are some of the unique challenges you've seen with the population you're working with? Especially, I'm thinking, as a trauma specialist, and I know you work a lot with this too. What are some of the experiences of trauma that some of your more marginalized clients have experienced?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of like I work with the overlap, but there are also people that are just like one of the identities that I work with. But what I see is like a common thread through all of like the minority or like marginalized identities is this like loss of trust in yourself. And so many of my clients are like, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, or maybe it's not that big of a deal, or maybe I should have done this, or it was my fault, or there's a lot of like lack of self trust. And I think a lot of the work that we do together is really just like helping people to start trusting themselves again, trusting their perspectives, trusting what they're witnessing, trusting their emotions, and not trying to make them fit into what they think it should be or what it should look like, and just kind of like taking off that pressure to allow them to just be. And once people are able to say, like, okay, this is who I am, this is what I went through, this is what I'm going through, it's a lot easier to do therapy. But initially, we have a lot of people that have either been harmed by the healthcare industry as a whole, whether that be their like mental health or their physical health, or education. There's so many different areas where damage can be done. And so a lot of people have this mistrust in people that are saying that they're here to help them, because people that were supposed to help them hurt them. I think that's one of the biggest common things that I see.
hmm And I think so much of the time it's not even intentional. I mean, and we're having this conversation so much more nowadays, and I'm happy we're having it. But like, the term microaggression, like that's a pretty recent term. That's not something I really knew about growing up. It's not like I learned about that. Right. And so I'm really glad we're having these conversations, and I'm glad that we're seeing a trend, like even on with social media or television, movies, we're seeing more different kinds of people represented. Even with the Olympics right now, I'm noticing a lot of promotion for the Paralympics that's coming up after the Olympics, right? And we didn't used to see people with prosthetics and things like that on television. So I love that this is happening. And there also seems to be, in this very highly polarized, very intense climate, especially in America right now, there also seems to be a lot of pushback against that. And I'm wondering what like some of your clients might be struggling with like the current political climate, without getting too much into it. But like, how does that affect someone when there has been a fair amount of progress in some, I'm in California, in some areas, but like now there's all this pushback, like we need to be, and even against women, and we need to be back in like the 1800s, in our Victorian gowns, and I don't know. It's kind of crazy the times we're living in. Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from what I've heard in like my personal and professional life. Is I think that there's this like air of like hypervigilance that everybody that is maybe their rights or like their human rights are in limbo, everybody's kind of like holding their breath. And I think that there is a lot in like the therapy space, especially when you're working with trauma, to try and like help people to have that big exhale of like, okay, it's okay now, or the trauma is over, or the threat is over, or like you can relax. And for many people, like, no, they can't. They can't relax because because we see the news, we know that there are so many people who their lives are very dependent upon certain legislation or certain policies that are there. And I think that for many people, it is something that we talk about in the therapy space a lot. And it's one of those where I'm like, I don't know what to tell you except for like same. Like I hear you, I agree with you, I see it. And I think that for a lot of people, it keeps them kind of stuck in that fight or flight space every time we watch the news or every time there's a new debate or interview or whatever. And I think that you said it a little bit earlier, talking about how like it feels like there's been more representation, and I think that there's a lot of different like new vocabulary terms or new ideas that are making their way into more privileged spaces. But those people that we're seeing now that in a mainstream way have always been here. And so, like microaggressions and homophobia and those things are not new to the people that belong in those groups. It is new to people that might care about the people that belong in those groups. But for people that are multiply or even like singly marginalized, this isn't new. And I think that when you are working in a way that is like culturally competent or geared towards the identity of the person in front of you as a therapist, we have to be educated. We have to recognize all of the things that may be going on, both in the world and what identity characteristics the person in front of us is holding, and how outside of whatever they're sharing with us, just the context of their lives and their communities, how that can also impact your ability to heal. It's really hard to heal when you're in fight or flight.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's what I see. I see a lot of fear. It's sort of that xenophobia. On the one end, it's the fear of difference, and on the other end, it's fear. It can be fear of being yourself because being yourself might get you harmed, might get you traumatized. Right? That's always been along with it. On this topic of cultural competence, this is a term we use as therapists. When someone like myself who may not identify in some ways as a minority, and I haven't had some of the experiences that maybe you have or some of our clients have had. I feel like there's this definitely pressure to be culturally competent, but then sometimes it also feels like we have to kind of walk on eggshells. Sometimes I'm like hesitating using my words because I'm afraid I'm going to offend someone unintentionally. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth. I'm going to say the wrong thing, and someone's going to be offended, and I'm going to look like an idiot. Um, how how can we be having these conversations like what you and I even are talking about right now in a sensitive way though where maybe people feel like they can communicate openly and not feel either like on one extreme or the other. I have to walk on eggshells or be horribly like somehow offensive to somebody. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes this topic is overcomplicated. Because if we think about it, like let's say that I have, I don't know, a question about something, and I'm at the grocery store, and there are two people that I see, like I'm trying to find where the eggs are or something, and there's two people that I see, a complete stranger or the grocery clerk. Most likely I'm going to go up to the grocery clerk who I know is here, who I have like there's an expectation that they're there to help me, and like we may even have a relationship. I might see them every Thursday or whatever. And I think that there is a lot more grace in relationships where you have taken the time to cultivate a relationship. You have taken the time to like signal to people that you're trying and that you're like there. And I think that a lot of people that feel that anxiety may like bring up difference so soon before the relationship has even been founded. And those differences, like maybe I like if you were my therapist, for example, and you're white and I'm biracial, and I said, okay, like I'm coming in to talk about my anxiety, and you're like, well, I'm white and you're not. That throws me off completely because I'm not even here to talk about my race. I'm here to talk about my anxiety. And while that is relevant, it feels more checkboxy if we're just talking about it to talk about it. And I think that when we take the time to form the relationship and understand the identity of the people that we're talking to, um, and take the time, and like that doesn't happen in one intake in 45 minutes or whatever. That takes a little bit to be like, tell me about your worldview, tell me about the things that impact you. And once we learn, then we have the language that they're using to describe their own lives, and you just use that. So I think that learning from the people that you're trying to help is like always a good way to go. I think the other thing is, as therapists and as people that hold power in spaces in general, we have to check our egos because we're going to get it wrong. And I think that that is something that, like in therapy and coaching and all of the things that I do, I will like read back my notes, or I will say, like, okay, this is what I'm hearing. Tell me what I have right and tell me what I have wrong. And rather than making somebody like correct me, I give them wide open, like, okay, which things did I not do right? Or which parts am I not understanding? And I think that has really created an atmosphere that feels collaborative and a little bit more equal um, with the people that I work with, and in my relationships outside of like work as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things you work with a lot with clients is this idea of identity and
Mhm.
also intersectionality. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about like my background. I've recognized like my whole life I've been biracial, but I didn't really come out or even get into like a queer relationship until I was 25, 26, something like that. And then I was diagnosed with ADHD around like 19. And then I developed a chronic illness post getting COVID as like a side effect of long COVID. And so, because all of these identities have hit me as an individual in different phases, not all at once, each time I like acquire a new marginalized identity, it shifts my entire experience of the world. Um, and so, there's like for many of us, there are layers to how we show up in the world. It may be our gender, our race, our sexuality, our socioeconomic status, our faith background. Like there's all of these things that add layers to who we are as people. And I think that when we're helping people to restore their mental health to a place that they're happy with, if we don't pay attention to how the context in which their lives are existing in, all of the different components that make them unique to them, and how each of those little tiny details matters, we miss out on recognizing like definitely like tools for resilience, but also we miss out on those little like nuanced things that would impact treatment. And so I describe myself as like an identity centered clinician, because we spend, I mean, my poor clients have to educate me on everything about their lives. And I tell them that, like, look, before I can help you do anything, I have to understand what your world is. And so I want to know, who are the people in your lives? What are the challenges you have? Who's the annoying person at work that says microaggressions to you and like that makes you angry? Who's your support system? And all of those things, because once we understand their and ourselves, like our perspective on how we're seeing the world, there's many avenues to change things or to improve them or to make them better. But I think that if we take this one size fits all approach, we're gonna CBT everyone to death, then we miss out on the areas where like that might not be what they need.
Yes. I have always had a bit of a pushback against, in our field against the people who are kind of, they've adopted this one modality and that's it. That's the only tool they're using for every single client that comes through, or even in addiction treatment. There's been,
Mhm.
it used to be all 12 steps. That's all it was,
Yes, step
right?
work or smart, and that's it.
Exactly. And actually I was going to ask you this, as someone who works in the addiction treatment field, you do sometimes and again, this may be more unique to California, but we do see programs that have specialized tracks, for example, for LGBTQ. Our program is trauma specific.
Mhm.
We are doing co-occurring disorders and specifically women with trauma. So, do you think more specialized programs like that can be helpful, or I mean, I guess it depends on the client, but sometimes I feel like we may have a client who even identifies with some of the identities you've talked about, And then here we are in Marin County with a bunch of white women of a certain
Mhm.
socioeconomic, you know what I mean? Sometimes I wonder, like, would we serve our clients better if we had more specialized tracks? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, have you ever walked into a room and been like the only white person?
Yeah, actually.
Okay.
In traveling in Asia, yes.
Okay, and what was I'm answering your question with a question in true therapist style. What was that experience like for you?
It was a little bit odd for sure. Like, I'm, I'm having the privilege that I have, you don't always realize here at home, but being somewhere else, I definitely felt a little bit odd. I also remember there were a lot of women wearing, they were Islamic, so they were very covered up and it was hot and I was wearing shorts. So I
Mhm,
felt kind of self-conscious and like, am I
mhm,
offending anybody by wearing shorts? Is it okay that I'm here doing
mhm.
that? Yeah, those are some of the things I was thinking.
And so while you were doing that, all of those thoughts, what you weren't doing is whatever you were there to do because you were in your head, right? Like thinking like, do I look like I'm supposed to? And I think that that is the experience of marginalized groups often, especially when they enter into like majority spaces, is like it's kind of like everybody got the memo except for you. And it's things that sometimes like we don't have any control over. Um, Oftentimes we don't have any control over when we're talking about identity. Like this is just who you are. And so I think that when we walk into spaces where, for whatever reason, we're stuck in our heads because it's like, do I belong here? Or am I doing things right? Or was I supposed to do this? Or why didn't I wear my hair this way? Or whatever the memo is that you feel like you didn't get, it takes away from your ability to be present. And so I think that one avenue to do that would be to like break off into these little like sects of treatment that are just for specific groups. But I think like everybody is so different, and that's like what intersectionality is really like getting at, is that like we're never going to be able to put people in groups, and we want to put people in groups so bad, but like people don't go in groups. People are just people are just there. And so I think that taking a approach to understand the people in front of us and what they need, then we can, like, if somebody was saying, I really want to talk about what this looks like for black women. Okay, if that is the need that they're saying, that they want community around people that share that identity characteristic, cool, perfect. But if we're doing it in a way to like make treatment more, I don't know, palatable or like easier to provide, then I think we're doing it for the wrong reasons. I think we have to listen to the groups that are in front of us and like be able to respond that way. I have a friend that also podcasts. His name is Steve, and he's just like, I just love this man. But his whole like brand is really around being queer and being sober. And I think that getting to know him and talking to him and kind of that kind of thing is like, this was something that I was missing, or like that I noticed was missing. And I was like, perfect, right? If you notice that there is something, there's a gap in something and like there's a need for it, then we should do it. But I think sometimes we get into this like, oh, well, we'll just make a group for the gays, a group for this, a group for that, and like then everything will be great. And it's like, well, that's not how this works. So I think that specialized treatment is awesome when it is in response to a need that has been voiced by the community that you're trying to help. Specialized is not to make our work easier or more efficient or cut corners around having to get to know people in front of us. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. And yeah, I think sometimes too, you spoke to sort of, I guess what I heard it as is overgeneralizing, because I have seen, people in an attempt to try to understand diversity and to be more inclusive, they also then end up stereotyping and saying, okay, well, then all gay people, such and such, or all BIPOC people, such and such, which again is sort of missing the point. It's maybe well intentioned, but again, you can't assume that one unique person's experience is going to fit the mold of what maybe other people in that marginalized group have experienced. That might not be their personal experience. So I think with that's the assume thing. Let's not make asses of you or me. Let's quit assuming and instead be in question with the person or group we're sitting with and let them show us what it is that's true for them or what their needs are. I think that's so salient. And so, and so important for those of us who are trying to learn, right? Yeah. Let's talk about just a little bit about you work a lot with folks with ADHD. You use the term neurodivergence. Some people, may not even know what that term really means. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, because this is newer, there's not an agreed upon definition or even like distinction. So there's a lot of people that say like if your brain basically like all mental health conditions and like some physical health conditions that change the way that your brain works or processes information all kind of go under the neurodivergent umbrella. I tend to think about neurodivergence and like our like neurotypes in general very similar to how we look at sexuality, where there's like a spectrum and we all kind of have different ways that our brain works, but there are ends of the spectrum that you may gravitate towards. And so there is, the world is designed for a certain type of brain. Um, and that differs based on like where you are and the country and all of that stuff. But generally speaking, our world in the US is designed for convergent thinkers. So if we think about convergent, it is where we take a bunch of facts and we narrow it down and we like can weed through the fluff and decide what's the most important and what's the most right answer or the most right way to do things. And there's like one way to do stuff. And that is like basically how you get promotions, how you get jobs, how you pass tests, like how you do everything associated with success in the US is for like convergent tasks or like oriented thinking. But people that are neurodivergent by default hang out in like divergent thinking, which is essentially kind of the opposite, but a little bit different. So you start with one piece of information, idea, whatever, and you start to make connections and you branch off and you start to think about other ways that different things are associated with whatever you started with. So if your teacher says like, okay, we're going to read a book about dogs, a convergent student may be like, okay, we're reading a book about dogs. Like I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen and figure out what this book's about. A divergent thinker might be like, oh, dogs. I have a dog. Did I feed the dog this morning? Did my mom said we were going to get another dog. I wonder if she did. What about our neighbor's dog? Right? And like all of these other ideas start to happen. And this is excellent for things like creativity. I'm convinced that most comedians and even musicians are like somewhere in the neurodivergent spectrum on that side of things because of the level of creativity and connection making that happens. However, our world is not equally doesn't equally reward those types of thinking, and a lot of the areas where neurodivergent people excel are places where not a lot of people make it. Like not everybody's going to be a musician, not everybody's going to be a famous painter, and that kind of thing. And so I think that when we look at like neurodiversity and we understand that not everybody sees the world through the same lens, not everybody's brain functions the same, and different people are going to need different supports in order to do different stuff. And depending, and that's individual specific. But I think that even the concept that like your brain is not broken just because it's different from what you thought is like huge for a lot of people that I see because they've walked around their lives 20, 30 years thinking like they're just stupid and they're not.
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that was it.
Yes, yes, yes. Because I think this now speaks, to the educational system, and what I mean, I grew up in a time when we didn't even have these. We didn't have testing. We didn't have, any kind of acknowledgement of different learning styles, anything like that. You were just expected to sit there for hours at a time, staring at the board, and be able to be present and attentive. And to me, it's such an antiquated learning system. This is what they were doing in the Little House on the Prairie times. And I don't think that that's, and you're expected to just sit still. And then, you have like 15 minutes of recess at lunch to like run around like on a full stomach and like try to get all
It's
that
very
energy
strange,
out.
yes.
Yeah. Like all of it is just seems ridiculous to me. And so many of the clients I've worked with these kinds of diagnoses grew up thinking their brain was broken because they didn't fit the mainstream educational system. They couldn't learn in that kind of environment. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, and what could we, what would you like to see, like, moving with the educational system? What could be different that would provide more inclusion for neurodivergent kids?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot in when I like teach my clients about it. I'm a very visual person, so I do a whole PowerPoint and everything when we talk about this. But I think that one of the things that, if we think back to school or just tasks in general, our teachers will make announcements of things like, okay, everyone, we're going to do a creative writing activity. So put on your creative thinking hat or whatever. And you're going to and what they do is they are prompting all of the kids that are convergent thinkers to like flip a switch into divergent thinking, because we all use both. But what doesn't happen is there's no cue that's like, hey, everyone, I know you have a lot of ideas in your head, but for this activity, we're going to just think of the most right answer. So you need to narrow it down and get all of your ideas, and like put them in the most correct way. And I think like if we just started by prompting everyone's brain to do what it needs to do, like talked about this is what we need to focus on, or what executive functioning aspect that you need in order to do this task, that would be huge for so many kids. That would be able to be like, oh, okay, this task I'm supposed to be creative and I can just like do my thing, but this one I'm not supposed to do that. But we end up prompting the kids who the world is made for and getting mad and like assigning some moral value to not being able to do that to the other kids, and label them as like bad or troublemakers or not working up to their potential or not applying themselves, when really like we could just do a little bit more work up front to help people and help kids. I mean, they're children, they don't know, they're learning how to think anyway. And so teaching them how to use their brain and what skills, if they're struggling, that they can use, that would go a long way. And I think we don't have to throw kids that, I mean, that's essentially what our special education services are doing, is presenting things in ways that, and like providing supports for kids who are not convergent, the typical kid. But if that was just like how we did school, I think we would have a lot of kids and a lot of adults that had figured it out a lot sooner on how their brain works and thrives, instead of being having their own children and trying to figure it out when they realize that there's a different way to do stuff, if that makes sense.
It totally does. Yeah. And do you think that we're seeing any movement in that direction? Are you seeing, I don't have a lot of contact with kids, maybe you don't either, but are you seeing any movement in the educational system towards more understanding of that?
Mm, I think so. My mom's a teacher, so I have like her perspective, but she's also neurodivergent. So she's always kind of done things a little bit different. I haven't been in a school in a while. A lot of my teen clients, though, there's a lot more like talking about it. I think that is a benefit of social media, as people are like out kind of talking about these different concepts. I think it has its own issues for sure, but I think one of the good things is there is more visibility and there's more representation for brains that think differently. And so I think that people in like Gen Zers are like seeing like, oh, my brain might work different. I'm not sure if the education system has caught up yet to that, just because I'm not in the schools, but my guess is probably no, because I know that there are still like aggressive amounts of standardized tests and things like that that are happening. But I mean, I'm hopeful that it could change. I'm not sure.
Do you have any suggestions for resources for maybe parents or teachers or even therapists who want to learn more about neurodivergence and how different learning styles, people's brains work, what might be helpful, a different way to language things or try to present concepts? Like, is there anything out there that you would recommend?
Um, Yes, there's actually a lot out there if you look for it. But honestly, the places that I've learned the most have been from people that have that identity. Like you will catch me in like the pages deep on Reddit looking to see like what trends or what things that people are saying about like their experiences. I when I went to grad school, I learned, we did like an ADHD day, and like that was that. And so I've learned a lot of different things. I think that it depends on who the person is. I know for kids and parents, one of the websites that I like really, really like is Understood. It's like understood.org, I think. And they actually have an app that is for like parents to connect and talk. So I think that's an excellent resource. I think that when you get into like adults and more specific, I think finding like creators that vibe with one or two of your identities is really great. Attitude, the that one website is excellent, and they do like free webinars. I know that there's not been anything that I've come across that taught about ADHD in the way that like I liked or that made sense to me. So I am like creating my own curriculum basically, that I take things that I find and kind of update it. I always tell my clients like this is the only time you'll see it look like this. It'll probably have an update because I add stuff every week, because I think that there's so many different types of brains even within like neurodivergent circles. So like what you need to get it may be different than what another person needs to get it. But I think that if you take the effort to read some of the books that are out there, I know one that like was really huge for me. I actually have it somewhere, but I rearranged my bookshelf. It's called Your Brain's Not Broken by Tamar Rosier, I think is how you say her last name. And that was like the first book on ADHD that I read, and I was like, oh my god, like yes, thank you. And so there's a lot of different things. I'm also in a lot of Facebook groups. Facebook is, what it is, but like there are people make Facebook groups for very niche identities. And that has been super cool. So I think that if people are trying to just like learn and understand, I would look up, like I would go on those things, but I would also get in community with people different from you. And I think that is the case outside of just like neurodivergence, but it's not a zoo, right? Like this is not this like one way thing for you to observe and like learn about an animal. These are people. And so I think that when we are talking about getting an understanding and like growing our ability to get it, we have to go to people and let them teach you about themselves and believe them. Like all they have to do is like, oh, this isn't working for me. I would learn better if you do this. Okay, cool. I don't need to like argue with you and be like, well, are you sure? Like, no, if that's what they're saying, like try it out, and just be willing to adapt. I think that's the biggest thing is if we are willing to adapt our perspectives, our assumptions, our beliefs, our strategies, everything to the person in front of us and make everything individualized, the world would be a much better place.
And I think you actually have probably answered my last question already with that, which is yeah, kind of what would you like to see the future of mental health of our field? You know, what would you like to see come into existence more or evolve more?
Yeah, I think I've already been really impressed. Well, I was impressed and then I was not impressed again because of legislation, and now I'm hopeful again. Um, but I was really impressed. I actually substitute taught a little bit when I was like in graduate school. And so I got to go back into schools and be in like the elementary schools. And so many of them are doing like socio emotional learning, like the SEL, different things. And it is so cool. Like if you haven't looked and seen those things, there is a website that does like brain breaks called Go Noodle. It is the cutest thing ever, and like I recommend that one all the time. On Teachers Pay Teachers, there are so many like empathy, compassion. Um, there's like the zones of regulation, excuse me, the zones of regulation are, it's kind of like the four different areas of things on how you're feeling. There's so many tools out there for school, and I think this is where you're going to get the most kids, right? Like is going to be at school. And so I think that it is really cool that teachers and the education system are doing their best despite kind of what they're allowed to do based on the state government or whatever. But I think like that has been a really cool thing, and I would love to see it be just a part of learning. Like I think self discovery is so important in like what we see now, and even among like my peers. And we like joke about it when you get into your 20s or 30s. Oh, you go find yourself. And it's like very strange if you think about it because you've been with you since birth. So why do I have to wait till I'm like 20 or 30 to start finding myself? And I think that if we were just like supporting self-discovery, whether that be how you learn best or how you feel love or how your emotions work, and doing those things as just like that's just the way things are as part of the culture, I think people would grow up with more skills. And then also just destigmatizing therapy and talking about it, which I do think that that has changed a lot within the past couple years, especially during like the pandemic, where people were on social media and they were talking about different things. I think it starts with visibility, and then we can follow through on when people are saying, oh, I vibe with that, or like that's what I have, or that's how I feel, then we can be responsive. But people don't know and they can't be what they can't see. So we have to make it visible and then work together to do the rest.
Super great. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's been super enlightening, and I really appreciated you and the work that you do and the conversation we've had. If people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
You can go. Everything's like linked in my like Instagram, so you can go there. It's just at Dr. Essence Rivers. I do have a newsletter, like email list that I send out. I'm working on that's my ADHD project for now. To like send out weekly, just like little tiny baby sized tips of things that you can do to make your life just a little bit easier, and like some of that identity discovery. I'm also doing like webinars, and our practice does trainings. And so I advertise all of that stuff from Instagram. So that's probably where I would start if you were looking for me. And then the name of our practice is Customized Behavioral Healthcare. And we are able to see people in, I think it's 42 states right now with SciPact. And we have 3 psychologists that are all like we're not all the same, but that are able to do that. And we do testing and everything. So that's where you go for therapy. But if you just wanted to kind of hear more from me, that's where I would start.
Fantastic. Ah, wow. So wonderful. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
audience. Yes. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. If you have liked this episode, please do share it, subscribe, comment, rate it, all the things you're supposed to do to get those algorithms to get this information out there in the hands of more people. And we'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.